Video games are not fair. Well, at least the vast majority of video games aren't. And they're designed this way, intentionally designed to be unfair and to favour one victor over another. And the victor that they favour is you. They favour you. In the vast majority of games, the odds are stacked extremely heavily in your favour. And if they weren't, you probably wouldn't find them very fun. And the worst part of it all is that game developers achieve this unfairness through lies and deceit. Game developers need their games to be fun, because if they aren't, they will get bad reviews and nobody will buy the game. To make their game as fun as possible, they need to strike the correct balance between challenging yet beatable. Because a game being hard is not a problem. Lots of people like hard games, but people also like to win. And when victory's withheld from you for far too long, that's when the challenging nature of a game starts to become frustrating and tedious. The easiest way to have a player win would just be to cheat for the player, right? That's the easiest way to guarantee that the player wins every time. But if a player cheats, that sense of accomplishment is gone, and the game's back to not being fun again. So what's the solution to this? Well, that's simple. Games cheat for you without you even realizing it. Now, multiplayer games are, for the most part, designed to be fair. They don't cheat for you. The only time a multiplayer game will help you out is if it helps both players equally. Co-op games aren't fair, and they're multiplayer games because all of the human players are all on the same team, so stacking the odds in their favour is fine. But competitive multiplayer games try and make things as balanced as possible so that both sides feel like they had a fair fight. But for single-player games and co-op games, the odds are almost always stacked in your favour. Sometimes it's not all that hidden, like in Halo, where you can take lots of shots before dying, whereas most of the enemies die in a single headshot. Not to mention that the AI in these sorts of games is not the brightest, so being a sentient human being with conscious thought is an advantage in itself. But there are much more subtle and sneaky ways that games give you an advantage. Did you know that in Doom 2016, your health bar is a complete and utter lie? That's right, the numbers shown here are fudged behind the scenes, not only to give you an advantage, but also to make you play in the way that the developers want you to. Your health bar depletes a lot faster when you have full health and take damage, versus when you have low health and take damage. Your lower health points are literally worth more than the higher ones, and this is done for multiple reasons. Well, for a start, it makes it harder for you to die so that you don't struggle too much with the game, but it also gives that feeling that every fight is extremely close and intense, which is exactly what the developers wanted when designing the game, because they know that that adrenaline rush feeling is extremely fun. In Doom, the main way you get health back is the glory kill system, where you get up close to enemies and brutally execute them, and glory killing an enemy drops health packs. So making your health get low fast and stay low for most of the fight incentivizes you to use those fun and flashy glory kills more often. Another example of games cheating on your behalf is in platformers, especially 2D platformers. It's called COYOTE time, named after Wile E. Coyote from the Looney Tunes, who would often run off a cliff and comically hover over the edge for a second before falling to his doom. Essentially, COYOTE time is a grace period after you walk off of a ledge in a platformer where you can still jump, despite not being stood on the floor. You're essentially jumping off of thin air, but it's one of the key secrets to getting your platformer to feel good to play. Because despite what people might say, players don't actually want tight controls and responsive controls. They want controls that feel tight and responsive. If a player presses the jump button a frame too late and then falls to their death, they would feel cheated, despite the fact that they were the person who made the mistake. A single frame at 60 FPS is about 16 milliseconds, or roughly 100th of a second. If a player presses the jump button a 100th of a second too late, they will be adamant that they timed their jump just in time. So giving players that grace period makes your game feel more responsive and tight, despite the fact that COYOTE time actually has the opposite effect. It makes it less responsive and tight. If this feature didn't exist, it would feel like the game was eating your jump input, despite the fact that you're just pressing jump too late. Platformer developers make the game feel more responsive by making it more generous with its inputs. This can be found in countless platformers. Buffer systems in fighting games are another similar example. If you get punched in a fighting game, you are put into hit stun, where you can't move, you can't attack, and you can't block. But most modern fighting games have a buffer system. The buffer system allows you to press a button before your hit stun ends, and the move or block will come out the frame that your hit stun ends. You're buffering the move for when the hit stun ends, because if you don't have that buffer in the game, getting moves out as fast as possible after your hit stun would be basically impossible. Accurately predicting how long your hit stun will last and then being able to time your move down to the frame would be insanely difficult, and it would make the game feel like it was eating your inputs despite the fact that it's just being precise. Even just mashing a button would make it really hard to get the move out on the first frame after hit stun. Some older games either don't have a buffer system at all, or have very few things that can be buffered, and those games feel really unresponsive compared to other modern fighters. This is one example of a way that multiplayer games help both players equally. Both players can buffer their moves. So many games do these sorts of things to give you a more enjoyable experience when you play, and I bet the vast majority of you didn't even notice until I or someone else pointed it out to you. Game devs have to design their games to feel fair, not to actually be fair. They essentially have to design around human psychology, because human brains are predictably illogical, so game devs build around this. Back in the days of the World of Warcraft beta, Blizzard were worried that people were binging their game too hard, playing it for way too long and being logged on for like 12 hours a day. So they introduced a system where the longer you were logged in, the lower the amount of experience points you would get was. And people who played for a very long period of time would find themselves leveling up slower. And people absolutely hated it. They'd lost their minds because they were being punished by Blizzard for playing Blizzard's game. But instead of removing the system, Blizzard just reworked it slightly. Rather than getting less XP for playing for too long, you would instead gain an XP bonus that would build up while you were logged off. The numbers were pretty much exactly the same, but the fan reception was much different. They renamed it to the rest system, and it's still a feature to this day. Everyone reacted very poorly to the negative reinforcement, but reacted really well to the positive reinforcement. It's funny how that works, isn't it? The same principles that caused this weird thing to happen are the same principles that forced designers to stack the odds in your favour in single-player games in strange and creative ways. The fact of the matter is that most players don't actually want their single-player experiences to be fair. It's far more exciting to be the Master Chief chewing through hordes of evil aliens than it is to be a random foot soldier who dies in one hit just like the enemies do. Some games pull off the player being weak quite well, but for the most part, being a powerhouse is far more fun. So whenever you load up a game, take into consideration the clever little lies the game is telling you to make you have as much fun as possible. Thanks for watching.